The distant wail of a coyote pierced the dawn silence as Nathaniel Porter surveyed his ranch from the weathered porch of his homestead. His calloused hands gripped a chipped coffee mug, steam rising in tendrils against the cool Montana morning. At 35, the lines around his eyes told stories of both joy and hardship, mostly the latter since his beloved wife, Sarah, had passed 3 years prior, leaving him alone with 5 children and a sprawling cattle ranch outside of Whitefish, Montana. Pa. Emma's crying again and I can't find her other sock. 8-year-old James stood in the doorway, his shirt buttoned wrong and hair sticking up in wild directions. Nathaniel sighed, draining the last of his bitter coffee. Tell her to wear yesterday's. We're already running late for school. The year was 1878, and the Montana Territory still retained much of its untamed character, despite the gradual push of civilization westward. Nathaniel had built his ranch from nothing, working alongside Sarah until consumption had stolen her from him, leaving an emptiness he'd filled with endless work and the chaotic love of his children. Inside the 2-story log home, chaos reigned. 12-year-old Thomas was arguing with 10-year-old William about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. 6-year-old Emma sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face over her missing sock, while 4-year-old Abigail happily smeared jam across the wooden table. Enough. Nathaniel's voice cut through the mayhem. Thomas, chickens. William, get the wagon ready. James, help your sisters. We leave in 10 minutes. The children scattered like startled quail, knowing their father's patience had worn thin. Nathaniel rubbed his temples, wondering how Sarah had managed it all with such grace. The children were fed, clothed, and loved, but the house was perpetually in disarray. Meals were simple affairs of whatever Nathaniel could manage, and Sundays, once a day of rest and proper dinner, had become just another day of struggle. After depositing the children at the schoolhouse in town and leaving Abigail with Mrs. Winters, the elderly widow who watched her during the day, Nathaniel headed to the general store to replenish their dwindling supplies. Morning, Nathaniel. Walter Green, the store owner, nodded as he entered. Got those nails you ordered last week? Appreciate it, Walter. Nathaniel placed his list on the counter. Need these too when you get a chance. The bell above the door jingled, and both men turned to see a woman neither recognized enter the store. She stood about 5'5", with chestnut hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. Her dress was plain but well kept, and she carried herself with quiet dignity. Good morning, she said, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. I'm looking for Mr. Green. Walter stepped forward. That's me, madam. What can I do for you? I'm Katherine Collins. She extended her hand. I sent a letter last month about the teaching position. Miss Collins, Walter's face brightened. Yes, of course. We weren't expecting you until next week. The train connections were better than anticipated, she explained, removing her gloves. I hope it's not an inconvenience that I've arrived early. Not at all. We've been desperate for a teacher since Miss Wilson left to get married. Walter turned to Nathaniel. This is Nathaniel Porter, one of our local ranchers. His children will be in your classroom. Nathaniel nodded, suddenly aware of his dusty clothes and unshaven face. Madam, you'll have 3 of mine, Thomas, William, and James. Good boys, mostly. Emma starts next year. Katherine smiled, revealing a small dimple in her right cheek. I look forward to meeting them properly. I saw several children at the schoolhouse as I passed. Is that where I'll be staying as well? Walter cleared his throat. That's the difficulty, Miss Collins. The teachers' quarters aren't quite ready. We had some water damage last month and the repairs aren't finished. I see. Katherine's expression remained composed, though Nathaniel noticed a flicker of concern in her hazel eyes. Is there a boarding house in town where I might stay temporarily? Mrs. Landry's place is full up with railroad surveyors, Walter explained, and the hotel's being renovated. Nathaniel found himself speaking before he'd fully thought it through. I have a spare room. Both Katherine and Walter looked at him in surprise. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean. My daughter Abigail's too young for school yet, so she'd be around during the day, but the others will be your students. Katherine studied him for a moment. That's very kind, Mr. Porter, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Nathaniel said, though he was already questioning his impulsive offer. Just until the teachers' quarters are ready. Walter looked relieved. Nathaniel's a respectable man, Miss Collins, widowed 3 years now with 5 young ones. Having a woman around might do those children some good. Katherine seemed to consider this, weighing propriety against necessity. If you're certain it wouldn't be an inconvenience, Mr. Porter, I would be grateful for the accommodation, just until my permanent quarters are ready. I'll bring the wagon around after I finish my errands, Nathaniel said, nodding to them both before stepping outside, wondering what exactly he had just volunteered for. Katherine spent the morning touring the schoolhouse with the mayor, reviewing the curriculum left by the previous teacher, and meeting a few town residents. By mid-afternoon, she was standing on the porch of the schoolhouse with her 2 trunks, waiting for Nathaniel Porter to arrive as promised. The wagon that approached was loaded with supplies, driven by a man who looked more comfortable on horseback than on the seat of a wagon. 3 boys of varying heights sat behind him, all staring curiously at her as they approached. Miss Collins, Nathaniel tipped his hat. Sorry to keep you waiting. Got caught up at the blacksmith's. No apology necessary, Mr. Porter. The eldest boy, who looked about 12, hopped down and approached her trunks. I'm Thomas Porter, madam. This is William and James, he said, indicating his brothers who were now scrambling down from the wagon. Pleased to meet you, Thomas, William, James. She nodded to each boy, noting their features all had their father's strong jaw and dark hair, though the youngest had eyes that must have come from their mother. We'll get your things loaded up, Nathaniel said, helping Thomas with the larger trunk. We need to collect Emma and Abigail before heading home. The ride to the Porter Ranch was filled with the boys' curious questions about where she was from, Philadelphia. Whether she had taught before, yes, for 3 years. And if she knew how to ride a horse, she did, though it had been some time. Emma, a small girl with pigtails, regarded her silently from beside her father, while little Abigail fell asleep against her brother William's shoulder. The Porter homestead came into view just as the sun began to sink toward the mountains, a substantial log house with a broad porch, several outbuildings, and a barn. A corral held several horses, and cattle grazed in the distance. It was a working ranch, not particularly tidy but solid and well established. It's not much, Nathaniel said as he halted the wagon, but it's home. It's lovely, Katherine replied sincerely, taking in the beautiful setting against the backdrop of mountains. The inside of the house told a different story. While structurally sound, it bore the unmistakable signs of a home without a woman's touch. Clothes were draped over chairs, dishes were stacked haphazardly, and dust had accumulated in corners. Katherine kept her expression neutral as Nathaniel showed her to a small bedroom off the main living area. This was my office, he explained, looking slightly embarrassed. Not much, but it has a door. The boys sleep in the loft and the girls have a room upstairs. It's perfect, Katherine assured him, though the room contained only a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a chair. Thank you for your hospitality. Nathaniel nodded awkwardly. We usually eat around 6, nothing fancy. After he left, Katherine sat on the bed, wondering what she had gotten herself into. She had come to Montana seeking a fresh start after her fiancé had broken their engagement for a woman with a larger dowry. The teaching position in Whitefish had seemed like a chance to rebuild her life, but she hadn't anticipated being thrust into the heart of a family still recovering from loss. Dinner that evening was a chaotic affair. Nathaniel served a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and slightly burned biscuits. The children ate hungrily, talking over one another and occasionally arguing until their father's sharp voice restored temporary order. "You always cook, Mr. Porter?" Katherine asked during a brief lull in conversation. "Pa can't cook," James announced bluntly. "Everything tastes like saddle leather." "James," Nathaniel warned, though there was no real anger in his voice. "I manage. Mrs. Winters brings food sometimes, and the boys can handle simple things." Katherine observed the family dynamics throughout the meal. Despite the chaos, there was obvious love between father and children. What they lacked wasn't affection but structure, and the softer touches that a mother would provide. After dinner, the children scattered to complete evening chores while Nathaniel sat at the table reviewing what appeared to be ledgers. Katherine began clearing the dishes. "You don't need to do that," Nathaniel said, looking up from his work. "I'm happy to help while I'm here," she replied, already filling the washbasin with water. "It seems only fair in exchange for your hospitality." "The children should be helping," he frowned. "Thomas, William, please," Katherine interrupted. "I don't mind, truly. I've been sitting on trains for days. It feels good to be useful." Nathaniel studied her for a moment before returning to his ledger. "Suit yourself, but don't let them take advantage of your kindness. They've grown too accustomed to living like wild things." As Katherine washed the dishes, she listened to him muttering over his accounts. From what she could gather, the ranch was financially stable but not prosperous. When the younger children returned for bedtime, she observed their routine minimal washing, prayers rushed through, and clothing for the next day chosen haphazardly if at all. Later, after the house had quieted, Katherine unpacked her few belongings. Among them was a small framed photograph of her parents, both now deceased, and a well-worn Bible. Her mother's voice seemed to echo in her mind. "Always look for ways to be of service, Katherine. That's how we find our place in the world." She fell asleep wondering what service she might offer to this fractured family, beyond teaching the children their lessons. The next morning, Katherine rose early, dressing quietly in the pre-dawn darkness. To her surprise, the kitchen was already occupied. Nathaniel stood at the stove, attempting to coax life from the banked embers. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He straightened quickly. "Miss Collins, you're up early." "I'm accustomed to early hours." "May I help with breakfast?" Nathaniel hesitated, then stepped aside. "If you're offering, I won't refuse. Coffee's important, the rest." He shrugged. Katherine set to work, finding the kitchen poorly organized but adequately stocked. By the time the children began to stir, she had coffee brewing, oatmeal cooking, and had managed to locate eggs that, miraculously, hadn't been gathered for several days. The children entered the kitchen in various states of dishevelment, their surprised expressions at finding her cooking nearly identical to their father's. "Are those real eggs?" James asked incredulously, sliding onto the bench. "Indeed they are," Katherine smiled, placing a plate before him. "From your own chickens, though they were quite hidden." "We forgot to gather them," Thomas admitted, looking slightly ashamed. "Again." "Perhaps we can establish a schedule for chores," Katherine suggested lightly. "In my experience, tasks are less likely to be forgotten when there's a system." Nathaniel watched from the doorway, coffee in hand. "Miss Collins isn't here to be your mother," he said gruffly. She's your teacher and our guest." "Of course," Katherine agreed smoothly. "I merely meant that while I'm here, I'd be happy to help organize things." Professional habit. I'm afraid teachers like order. Breakfast proceeded with less chaos than dinner had, the children seemingly on better behavior in the light of day and with a proper meal before them. Afterward, Katherine helped the school-aged children gather their books and lunch pails while Nathaniel hitched the wagon. "I can stay with Abigail today," Katherine offered as they prepared to leave. "Save you the trip to Mrs. Winter's." Nathaniel's brow furrowed. "Don't you need to prepare for school? It starts Monday." "I reviewed the materials yesterday. I can work on my lesson plans here just as easily, and it would give me a chance to get to know your youngest." He studied her face, as if searching for ulterior motives. "Abigail can be a handful." "So can most 4-year-olds, Katherine smiled. "We'll manage fine." After a moment's consideration, Nathaniel nodded. "All right, we'll be back mid-afternoon. There's a pistol in the top drawer by the stove if you need it." "A pistol?" Katherine's eyes widened. "For snakes, mostly," he explained. "Or the occasional coyote that gets too curious. You know how to use one." "No, I've never had occasion to learn," Nathaniel frowned. "We'll remedy that soon. This isn't Philadelphia, Miss Collins. Even school teachers need to protect themselves out here." After they departed, Katherine found herself alone with Abigail, who regarded her solemnly from beneath a mop of unruly dark curls. "Well, Abigail," Katherine said cheerfully, "what shall we do today?" "I want to see the baby calves," the child announced. "Pa says I can't go alone." "That seems like a fine idea, but perhaps first we might tidy up a bit." Abigail scrunched her nose. "Tidying is boring." "It can be," Katherine agreed, "but it goes faster with help, and then we can visit the calves with clear consciences." To Katherine's surprise, the little girl proved to be a willing helper once the task was presented as a game. Together they straightened the main room, gathered scattered clothing, and even discovered several items long thought lost, including Emma's missing sock. When Nathaniel and the children returned that afternoon, they found Katherine and Abigail sitting on the porch, the little girl's hair neatly braided and the house noticeably more orderly. "Pa, Miss Collins helped me make biscuits," Abigail exclaimed, running to her father. "Real ones that don't burn." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow at Katherine as he lifted his youngest daughter. "Sounds like you've had a busy day." "Very pleasant," Katherine replied. "Abigail is excellent company." That evening, Katherine insisted on cooking dinner despite Nathaniel's protests. "Please consider it my contribution to the household while I'm here," she said firmly. "Teaching is my profession, but cooking is something I genuinely enjoy." The simple meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and green beans from the neglected garden was met with enthusiasm from the entire family. Katherine had also managed, with Abigail's help, to bake an apple pie using fruit from the orchard behind the house. "This is real food," William declared, reaching for a second helping. "Not just sustenance." Nathaniel shot his son a look. "My cooking kept you alive." "Barely," Thomas muttered, though his expression grew contrite when his father's gaze turned to him. "Your father has managed admirably," Katherine interjected diplomatically. "Running a ranch and raising 5 children requires remarkable strength." Nathaniel's expression softened slightly. "We've managed. Indeed you have. But perhaps while I'm here, I can help lighten the load slightly." Over the next few days, a routine began to develop. Katherine rose early to help with breakfast before accompanying the older children to school. Abigail divided her time between Mrs. Winters and staying home with Katherine, depending on the schoolteacher's duties. In the evenings, Katherine prepared dinner while the family attended to ranch chores. Slowly, the house began to reflect her influence: cleaner, more organized, and increasingly comfortable. By Sunday, exactly 1 week after her arrival, Katherine had settled into the Porter household as if she'd always been there. The children had grown accustomed to her presence, even looking to her for guidance almost as naturally as they did to their father. Nathaniel, however, maintained a careful distance, polite but reserved. That morning, Katherine rose even earlier than usual. Today was her first Sunday in Whitefish, and she intended to attend church services. More importantly, she had plans for afterward plans she hadn't shared with the family. "Are you coming to church with us, Miss Collins?" Emma asked as Katherine helped her button her dress. "Of course, and I was hoping your father might allow me to prepare a special Sunday dinner afterward." Emma's eyes widened. "We haven't had Sunday dinner since Ma died." "Pa says it's too much trouble." "Well, with enough helping hands, it needn't be trouble at all," Katherine said gently. "Would you like that, more than anything?" Emma whispered, her small face suddenly serious. "Ma always made Sunday special." The church service was well attended, the small white building filled with familiar faces from town and surrounding farms. Katherine sat with the Porter family, aware of the curious glances directed their way. Nathaniel, dressed in his best shirt though it needed pressing, sat stiffly beside her, his expression unreadable as Reverend Taylor spoke of community and support during difficult times. Afterward, as townsfolk gathered outside to socialize, several women approached Katherine, introducing themselves and inquiring about her adjustment to Whitefish. "We were surprised to hear you're staying with the Porters," said Mrs. Landry, the boarding house owner. "Not that there's anything improper, of course, with all those children as chaperones. It's just that Nathaniel has kept to himself since Sarah passed. He's been very kind to offer me accommodation until the teachers' quarters are ready," Katherine replied carefully. "And the children are delightful." "They're wild as jackrabbits," said another woman whom Katherine recognized as the mayor's wife. "Though I suppose that's to be expected without a mother's influence. Sarah was such a gentle soul." "They're spirited," Katherine corrected mildly, "and clearly loved. Mr. Porter has done remarkably well under difficult circumstances." The women exchanged glances that Katherine couldn't quite interpret, but the conversation shifted to details about the upcoming school term. By the time they returned to the ranch, Katherine was even more determined to make her plan for Sunday dinner a success. "Children, I could use your help," she announced as they entered the house. "I'd like to prepare a proper Sunday dinner if your father approves." All eyes turned to Nathaniel, who looked momentarily startled. "I don't expect you to go to such trouble, Miss Collins." "It's no trouble with help," she insisted. "Sunday dinner was a tradition in my family and I miss it. Consider it a thank you for your hospitality." After a moment he nodded. "All right. What do you need us to do?" The afternoon transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Thomas and William were dispatched to select a chicken for roasting, while Nathaniel was persuaded to dig fresh potatoes and carrots from the garden. James and Emma set the table with the good dishes Katherine had discovered in a cupboard dusty from disuse. Even Abigail was given tasks, carefully tearing bread for stuffing under Katherine's watchful eye. By late afternoon, delicious aromas filled the house. Katherine moved about the kitchen with practiced efficiency, directing her helpers, adding pinches of herbs, and somehow managing to keep everyone engaged without conflict arising. Nathaniel found himself watching her from the doorway, struck by the transformation in his home and his children. When they finally gathered around the table, the difference from their usual meals was striking. A golden brown roasted chicken sat at the center, surrounded by vegetables, stuffing, fresh biscuits, and gravy. Katherine had even managed, with Emma's help, to make a blackberry cobbler for dessert. "This is incredible," Thomas said, staring at the spread with wide eyes. Like before. He trailed off, but everyone knew what he meant, like before their mother died. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table until Katherine spoke. In my family, we always shared something we were grateful for before Sunday dinner, she said gently. Would you mind if we did that today? Nathaniel cleared his throat. That's how Sarah liked to begin Sunday dinner too. Then perhaps in her memory, Katherine suggested. He nodded, his expression softening. James, would you start? One by one, the children offered their gratitude for the food, for a successful branding season, for a new fishing pole. When it came to Nathaniel, he hesitated. I'm grateful for this moment of peace, he said finally, his eyes meeting Katherine's briefly. And for unexpected kindness. The meal that followed was unlike any the Porter household had experienced in years. There was laughter, stories, and a sense of lightness that had been absent for too long. Katherine shared tales of her childhood in Philadelphia, while the children eagerly recounted adventures on the ranch. Even Nathaniel contributed occasionally, his deep voice warming as the evening progressed. After the younger children were in bed, Katherine found herself alone with Nathaniel on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamond dust. Thank you, he said quietly, for dinner, for everything this week. It was my pleasure, she replied, wrapping her shawl more tightly against the evening chill. Your children are wonderful. They've been different with you here, better behaved, happier. They miss their mother, Katherine said carefully. Structure and routine provide comfort to children who have experienced loss, and proper meals help too, of course. Nathaniel turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful in the moonlight. The teacher's quarters should be ready by the end of the month, according to Walter. Yes, he mentioned that when I saw him at church. Katherine tried to ignore the strange pang of disappointment she felt. I'm grateful to have had this time with your family, though. We're grateful too, he said, his voice rough. More than I can properly express. The following weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Weekdays were filled with school for the older children and Katherine, while Nathaniel tended to the ranch with the help of his 2 hired hands. Evenings brought the family together for meals and conversation that grew increasingly easy and warm. Saturdays were for household tasks and necessary errands, with Katherine continuing to help organize the home and Nathaniel gradually allowing himself to rely on her assistance. And Sundays became special again. After church, they would return to the ranch for a proper dinner, each meal more elaborate than the last as Katherine taught the girls basic cooking skills, and even the boys learned to help with preparation. These Sunday gatherings stretched into long afternoons of relaxation, sometimes including reading aloud from one of Katherine's books or occasional visits from neighbors. Throughout this time, Katherine and Nathaniel maintained a careful propriety. She was, after all, the children's teacher and a temporary guest in their home. But something was changing between them, evident in lingering glances, conversations that stretched late into the evening after the children were asleep, and a growing ease in each other's presence. One evening in late September, after a particularly difficult day at school where she'd had to discipline William for fighting with another boy, Katherine found Nathaniel waiting for her on the porch when she returned home. "Is William all right?" he asked immediately. He came straight to the south pasture to help instead of coming to the house. "He's embarrassed," Katherine explained, setting down her books. "Fighting is against school rules and he knows it." Nathaniel frowned. Was he defending himself at least, in a way? "The Anderson boy was saying unkind things about your family situation." She hesitated. "About the children not having a mother." A muscle tightened in Nathaniel's jaw. "I see. I spoke with both boys and explained that words can hurt, but fists aren't the answer," Katherine continued. William understood, I think, but he's still upset. I'll talk to him. Nathaniel helped her with her books. Thank you for handling it fairly. Of course. She smiled up at him, struck suddenly by how handsome he looked in the golden afternoon light. I care about William, about all the children. Something shifted in his expression. Just the children. Katherine felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Porter, Nathaniel, he corrected gently. After 6 weeks of sharing meals and a home, I think you might call me Nathaniel. Nathaniel, she echoed, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. I care about this entire family, more than I probably should given my temporary position here. He took a step closer. And if it weren't temporary, Katherine's heart fluttered. What do you mean? Before he could answer, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Thomas rode into the yard, his expression urgent. Pa, the herd's scattered lightning spooked them during that storm moving in. Jenkins says we need every hand. Nathaniel's expression shifted instantly from tender to alert. I'll saddle up. Tell Jenkins I'm coming. He turned back to Katherine. I'm sorry, this conversation will have to wait. Of course, she nodded. Be careful. She watched as he strode toward the barn, his tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky where storm clouds gathered ominously on the horizon. The storm that hit that night was ferocious, wind howling around the corners of the house and rain lashing against the windows like angry fists. Katherine paced the main room, keeping the fire stoked and a lantern burning in the window while the children slept upstairs. Nathaniel and Thomas had not returned, and her worry grew with each passing hour. Near midnight, when the storm was at its worst, the door finally burst open. Nathaniel staggered in, soaked to the skin and supporting Thomas, whose face was pale with pain. He fell, Nathaniel explained tersely, helping his son to a chair. Horse slipped in the mud. I think his arm's broken. Katherine moved quickly, gathering towels and the medical supplies she discovered during her organization of the house. Let me see, Thomas. The boy's left arm was clearly broken, the unnatural angle and swelling unmistakable. With Nathaniel's help, she managed to set and splint it, using techniques she'd learned from her father, who had been a physician. Thomas bore the pain bravely, only a few tears escaping despite what must have been excruciating discomfort. We'll need to get him to the doctor tomorrow, she said, wrapping the arm carefully. But this should stabilize it for now. Thank you, Nathaniel said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. I didn't know what to do except get him home. You did exactly right, she assured him, turning her attention to his own condition. Now we need to get you both dry and warm. Thomas, you think you can make it upstairs if your father helps you? Once Thomas was settled in his bed with extra blankets and a dose of laudanum found in Sarah's old medical box, Katherine returned downstairs to find Nathaniel slumped before the fire, still in his wet clothes. You'll catch your death, she scolded gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. You need dry clothes and something hot to drink. He looked up at her, fatigue etched in every line of his face. The herd will still be there tomorrow, she finished firmly. You're no good to anyone if you fall ill. Please, Nathaniel. Something in her tone must have reached him, because he nodded and rose stiffly. When he returned in dry clothing, she had hot coffee waiting, laced with a splash of whiskey from the bottle he kept for medicinal purposes. You're quite accomplished, he said, accepting the mug gratefully. Setting bones, managing unruly children, cooking feasts from simple ingredients. Is there anything you can't do, Katherine Collins? It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her breath catch. Many things, she answered softly. But I'm good at learning. You saved us, he said suddenly, his gaze intense. Not just Thomas tonight, all of us, since the moment you arrived. Katherine shook her head. I've only done what needed doing. No, he insisted, setting down his mug and moving closer. You've brought light back to this home. Order, joy. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words, before our conversation was interrupted earlier. I was about to ask if you might consider staying, not as our guest, not as just the children's teacher. Catherine's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. What are you asking, Nathaniel? I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The children's mother, a permanent part of this family that has come to need you so desperately. Nathaniel, she whispered, overwhelmed by the directness of his proposal. We've known each other such a short time. I knew Sarah for 3 weeks before I asked her to marry me, he countered. Out here, life doesn't always allow for long courtships. I know what I feel, Katherine. I know what I see when I look at you with my children, when I look at you. And what do you see? She asked, needing to hear the words. Hope, he answered simply. A future I'd stopped believing was possible after Sarah died. Katherine felt tears gathering in her eyes. I care for you deeply, Nathaniel, and I love your children as if they were my own already. Is that a yes? He asked, a smile beginning to form. I need a little time, she answered honestly. Not because I don't care for you, but because this decision affects so many lives. I want to be certain. Disappointment flickered across his features, but he nodded. Of course, I understand. He took her hand gently. Take whatever time you need, we'll be here. The following days were a blur of activity. Thomas's arm was properly set by the doctor in town. The scattered cattle were mostly recovered, and Katherine continued her duties at school while helping manage the household. Through it all, Nathaniel was patient, never pressing her for an answer but making his feelings clear in countless small ways: a wildflower left on her desk, assistance with difficult chores, and lingering conversations after the children were asleep. The children, sensing something had changed between the adults, watched with varying reactions. Thomas and William exchanged knowing glances. Emma became even more attached to Katherine, following her like a shadow, while Abigail simply announced at dinner one evening, I want Miss Collins to be my new mama. The table fell silent as all eyes turned to Katherine, whose cheeks flamed. Abigail, Nathaniel began, but Katherine raised a hand to stop him. It's all right, she said, looking at each child in turn. I think we should discuss this openly. Your father has asked me to consider becoming his wife, which would make me your stepmother. I haven't given him my answer yet, because I wanted to be sure that all of you would be comfortable with such a change. Thomas, the eldest and most reserved, spoke first. We all knew it was coming. You fit here, Miss Collins. You make Pa smile again. You're already like our mother, Emma added earnestly. You take care of us and teach us things. And you cook real food, James contributed, earning a gentle cuff from William. What about you, William? Katherine asked, noting his silence. The boy looked up, his expression serious. Ma would have liked you, he said simply. That's what matters. Katherine felt tears threatening again. Thank you, William. That means more than you know. Later that evening, after another Sunday dinner that had become the highlight of their week, Katherine found Nathaniel alone on the porch. The October air was crisp, promising the winter to come, but the sky was clear and star-filled. The teachers' quarters are ready, she said, coming to stand beside him. Walter told me after church this morning. Nathaniel tensed. I see. I told him I wouldn't be needing them. He turned to her slowly, hope dawning in his eyes. Katherine, if your offer still stands, she said, her heart pounding, I'd like to accept it. I want to be your wife, Nathaniel. I want to be a mother to your children. The joy that transformed his face was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. Nothing would make me happier. When he kissed her, it was gentle yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. Katherine melted into his embrace, feeling as though she'd finally found her place in the world, not just as a teacher, but as the heart of a family that needed her as much as she needed them. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Whitefish, with the children standing proudly beside them and the entire town in attendance. Katherine wore a simple ivory dress ordered hastily from the catalog at Walter's store, and Nathaniel looked uncommonly handsome in a new suit. Reverend Taylor spoke of second chances and God's providence as he joined their hands together. "I knew the moment you cooked that first Sunday dinner," Nathaniel confessed later that night, when they were finally alone in what was now their bedroom. "I knew you were the one who could make us whole again." "It wasn't just the cooking," Katherine smiled, resting her head against his chest. "It was finding a family who needed what I had to give." The winter that followed was the happiest the Porter ranch had known in years. The house transformed under Katherine's care, becoming truly a home again. The children thrived with the stability and love she provided, and Nathaniel found himself laughing more, worrying less, and looking forward to each day with his new wife by his side. Spring brought the renewal of the land and a special announcement at Sunday dinner. Katherine, her face glowing with happiness, shared the news that their family would be growing larger by fall. "Another baby?" Abigail asked, wide-eyed. "Like the calves in the barn?" "Very similar," Katherine laughed, as Nathaniel squeezed her hand, his eyes suspiciously bright. "A new little brother or sister for all of you." As summer ripened into autumn, Katherine's form rounded with new life. She continued teaching until the town council insisted she take leave for the final months of her pregnancy. And then she turned her attention to preparing the nursery in what had once been her temporary room off the main living area. On a crisp November evening, with the children huddled nervously in the kitchen under Thomas's supervision, and the doctor summoned from town, Nathaniel Daniel Porter, Jr., made his entrance into the world, a healthy, robust boy with his father's strong features and his mother's hazel eyes. "He's perfect," Nathaniel whispered, cradling his newborn son while sitting beside Katherine on their bed. "Just like his mother. He completes our circle," Katherine said tiredly but with profound contentment. "The family we've built together." "Who would have thought," Nathaniel mused, gently stroking his son's tiny hand, "that a Sunday dinner could change everything?" "It wasn't just any Sunday dinner," Katherine corrected him softly. "It was coming home for both of us." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, the Porter family, now 8 strong, gathered around the newest addition, their home filled with the warmth of love that had begun with a simple meal shared around a table and had grown into something beautiful and enduring. 5 years later, the Porter ranch had prospered beyond Nathaniel's most ambitious hopes. With Katherine's careful management of the household accounts and her insistence that he hire additional hands rather than working himself to exhaustion, the cattle operation had expanded significantly. The original house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family. Little Nathaniel Jr., now a sturdy 4-year-old, had been joined by 2-year-old Rebecca, and Katherine was expecting their 3rd child together in the spring. On a particular Sunday in late summer, the extended family gathered for their traditional dinner, now an institution that occasionally included neighbors and friends from town. Thomas, at 17, was discussing his plans to attend college in Denver the following year, a prospect that filled Katherine with both pride and maternal anxiety. William and James were becoming fine young ranchers in their own right, while Emma, now 11, showed promise as a student that suggested she might follow in her stepmother's footsteps as a teacher someday. Remember the first Sunday dinner you cooked for us, Ma? Emma asked, passing the mashed potatoes. Though she had been old enough to remember Sarah, she had called Katherine Ma since shortly after the wedding, a transition that had happened naturally and with no pressure. How could I forget? Katherine smiled, resting a hand on her rounded belly. I was so nervous, wanting everything to be perfect. It was, Nathaniel said, his gaze warm as he looked at his wife across the table they had built together to accommodate their large family. Perfect enough to make me realize I'd found the woman who could heal our broken hearts. And cook edible food, James added with his characteristic directness, causing laughter to ripple around the table. As Katherine looked at the faces of her family, both those born to her and those who had become hers through love, she felt a fullness of heart that sometimes still overwhelmed her. From the lonely journey west to teach in a frontier town, she had found her true calling, not just as an educator, but as the heart of a family that had been waiting for her all along. I think, she said, meeting Nathaniel's gaze with love that had only deepened with the passing years, that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts like cooking a Sunday supper for a cowboy with many children and no wife. Until you, he finished for her, raising his glass in a toast that encompassed all they had built together. Until you, my love.